And now I'd like to introduce our next distinguished speaker, Dr. Michael Tucker, a top industry expert in cognitive psychology and psycholinguistics who held senior executive positions across highly reputable consulting organizations, improving commercial efforts of global brands for top pharmaceutical, biotechnology, medical diagnostics, and medical devices companies. Since 1997, Michael was identifying successful market entry and growth strategies for multi-billion-dollar brands across markets and organizations. His exceptional analytical and in-depth interviewing skills of key stakeholders translated into successful strategies and tactics, uncovering new growth opportunities while managing risks. Please welcome Michael.
All right. Thank you very much for that lovely introduction. I appreciate it. And I'm very pleased to be here to talk with you about a number of different things, very nicely able to dovetail off of a number of things that others have already talked about, and I'm very pleased to be able to do that. It's good that there's an awful there's a good thread line running through a lot of the things that people have already been talking about. So I like that. I'm going to be talking about the relationship of patients and healthcare providers and how they move into the conversations that we've already been having about marketing and bringing products to market, and more globally, the way that marketing research fits into answering some of the questions that have come up, and how marketing research can address some of the problems that come up at different places in the conversation. So we go to the next slide. I want to talk a little bit just about the role of marketing research generally, and avoiding some of the pitfalls of what I like to call product managers' disease. And it's not just product managers. The disease I'm speaking of is that over-enthusiasm that you sometimes see among people, not just product managers, but the engineers, the folks in the lab who developed the molecule, who developed the device, and who get enthusiastic about it because they're so jazzed because it is so wonderful. And what that disease is that overenthusiasm, and they can't wait to share it with the world. And when you have this disease as a product manager or the developer of this device or this molecule, you make some assumptions. You assume that your potential customers, whoever they might be, whoever you think is going to benefit from this, knows about some of the things, say the mechanism of action, or they need to know as much as you do about this product as the designer of it or the creator of it. And if they do, that information will inform their utilization, their prescribing, their trial, their adoption, and their enduring loyalty for all time. Both those assumptions I've learned over time are incorrect. That these things are not sufficient to ensure that adoption and ensure that enthusiasm the way that the developers have. And that disease is pretty virulent and challenging to manage. So if we go to the next slide, we can talk a little bit about what that looks like. So that enthusiasm, I don't discourage enthusiasm, but it has to be tempered. And some of the ways that you can identify some of the symptoms of that sort of product manager's disease that you sometimes see is it's based on an unrealistic strategy. So they may be going after the wrong customers, the people who may not be the recipients of this product or this device. They may not be the folks you should be targeting. And so you're wasting your energy on them because they are not going to be ultimately the users of your product or the utilizers of your product. Maybe you're going after the wrong specialty or the wrong subspecialty if it's a pharmaceutical device, or these are not people who will be using it in the operating theater if it's a device, a surgical device, let's say. You're promoting product attributes that the customers don't care about. They don't care about the mechanism of action. I want to know if it works. I don't care if it's if it works on high density lipoproteins or not. I just want to know if it lowers cholesterol. Or you're approaching the market incorrectly. You're trying to gain share against a competitor when really you should be niching yourself for a smaller component of the market. So their strategy is unrealistic. Or their positioning is unfocused. This is a very common one. I see this a lot, and I've seen this a lot in launch mode with customers, with clients. They want the product to be all things to all people, with the fear that if they don't do that, then they won't get the best value and nobody will know what it is. Nobody will know what to do with it, and their sales will plummet. Their shares will plummet, and they must make the best use of the market. And so it must go to all people. And then related to those things, sorry, we can stay on that slide just a moment, sort of a diffuse branding and complicated messaging. So because you're trying to be all things to all people, your storytelling is very diffuse. It's all over the place. It doesn't really focus on one thing. And so the customers, instead of coming away with a really complex and very nuanced story, are actually coming away with a very complicated story. I don't know where to use your product. I'm not even sure it's for me. I'm not going to try to figure it out. I'm just going to stay away from it. And those are some of the things that you see. Those are some of the symptoms that you see. So in the next slide. So let's think about that. Because what is the role of marketing research? Ultimately, marketers are trying to change behavior. What we're trying to do with all the things that we've been talking about up until this point is to change behavior effectively. You're trying to encourage the appropriate customer to utilize your product, to utilize whatever it happens to be, and use as much as you'd like in the appropriate ways, have positive experiences, and then come back and use it again. And to understand how to change behavior, you have to first understand what motivates behavior. And that's my wheelhouse. That's where I live. That's where I came from. So, sorry, could you go back, please? So what drives and changes behavior? I like to think about these things in sort of two general segments. And it's sort of coarsely put it, the information that happens above the neck, things you're thinking about, and then the things that happen below the neck. That is your thoughts, your feelings, your desires. So the things that happen above the neck are the knowledge and the knowledge gaps, things you know and things you don't know, attitudes, beliefs, those sorts of things. So things that you're conscious of, things that drive you in a very conscious way, for the most part, experiences, expectations, things that you have at your disposal that you can talk about for the most part. Things below the neck are the things of the heart and so on. Your needs, your self-esteem, your desires, your pleasures, your the things that adhere you to brands, the things that adhere you to choices that you make that go beyond simply I like it or don't like it, but it means something to you. It changes the way you feel about yourself. Coca-Cola is a great example. Coca-Cola is bubbly water, but Coca-Cola means something to people beyond what Coca-Cola is. And that's where branding comes in. That's where teasing out what those underlying emotional contexts are. And then going even further down are things that we really don't touch on very much in marketing research and in marketing, but are still things that can be motivating to people. Satiation, primal urges, drivers of behavior, basic human needs. Again, this can drive behavior. It can drive the things that we do on a day-to-day basis. Marketers may or may not be able to tap into those things, but those are also part of what motivates behavior. And to the extent that we can tap into those things and understand what those things are, we can perhaps change behavior based on understanding what those things are and how they influence the things that we do. Next slide, please. So if good research is about informed decision-making, if market research is about understanding the underlying motivators of behavior so that marketers can influence it, what then constitutes good marketing research? How do we treat that marketing, that product manager's disease? One successful approach that we advocate here is a marketing model, which is going back to some of the things that Kevin was mentioning about structure, about planning. We need to have a strategy, a structure in mind to help make sense of all of those things, all of those different influences, and how to tap into them and how to plan for the approach to a launch of a product, utilizing these different aspects of human behavior and how they influence the thoughts that we're making. So we go to the next slide, please. So the treatment to the market, sorry, there we go. So my suggestion is that you need a marketing model. And by a model, what I mean is simply a structured way of looking at how you incorporate market research to address some of the questions, some of the things that have come up, and doing it in a systematic way. A marketing model simply means that, some sort of structure that you impose upon all of the different types of research that you might incorporate. I have one that I've used over the years that I was trained on, that I tend to like because I've seen it work well. And I've seen when it isn't utilized or some structure isn't utilized, things don't go so well. There are lots of different models out there. The things that they share in common is that they are a roadmap to successful business questions that should be asked in a certain sequence and on the way to launching and marketing brands. And they are prescriptive in nature. They suggest that do this first. Once you've done this and you've answered these questions successfully, it's time to move on to the next step. And they suggest that at each step, there are marketing research questions that should be asked and marketing research enterprises that should be engaged in. And once you've done that, it's time to move on to the next one. They should be well executed marketing research exercises that should be done at these steps. And they provide diagnostic checkpoints. So if things aren't going well, you can go back and look at what was done and try to disambiguate some of the problems and find out whether or not, well, we didn't do that quite right. It was at this step that things started falling apart. We need to go back and re-examine what we did. All marketing models are flexible and customizable and iterative in their nature. And that's very important. Once you've done a step, you're not done. As you keep going and you find problems, you can go back and do it again. So that's part of the nature of these things. There's a structure involved, but it's not rigid. It's flexible, and it can involve returning to the scene of the crime if things start going poorly for you. And that's part of the nature of incorporating research into the process. Next slide. So one of the models that I follow, or a variant of it, this is a stepwise iterative model, starts with what we call product strategy. And the questions that you ask when you're beginning to think about strategic issues are things like, who are your target customers? Who is it you're going after? Are you looking at patients? Are you looking at physicians? Who are the people that you're ultimately going to be targeting with your marketing efforts? It could be both. It could be one over the other. Are the patients in pharma especially, it's a kind of a strange business because in pharma, the person who's writing the prescription is not the person who's ultimately going to be taking it. If the physician writes a prescription and the patient doesn't like it, then maybe you should be marketing more closely to the patient to convince them that in fact this is what they need. Who are your key competitors? Who should you be thinking about in your competitive set? Is it everybody who treats this condition? Is it only some people who share your attributes? How do you decide that? Your marketing research can tell you that. What are the key attributes of your product that will be addressed? Is it everything? Is it all about the safety in this market? Are you safer? Is that really your key linchpin? Or is it something else? How will you approach the marketplace? As we said, are you going to try to gain share? Are you going to try to niche your product? Are you going to try to grow the marketplace? If you're really going to run the show, are you going to grow the marketplace so that everybody wins, but you'll get a bigger piece of a bigger pie, etc. So those are all strategic questions. You got to decide what those things are, and the market research will help you to decide that. Then you want to talk about positioning, and we're going to talk more about positioning in just a second. Positioning, as I like to think of it, and again, as a psychologist, I love positioning more than most things. When we talk about them from a research point of view, positioning is that unique place in the hearts and the minds of your customers where your product lives. It is how they think of you. It is what your customers know and believe about your product. It is not what you say about it, it is what they think about it. And it can be the thing that drives you forward. It is how they think of who you are, what you do relative to the other competitors that are out there. And it is the linchpin, I believe, of all future marketing efforts. So if you do it right, everything else that comes later will shimmer rather, and could shimmy as well, but shimmer is what the word I was looking for. And then the next step in the process is branding. When we talk about messaging and creatives, and your all of your creative development and all of your future marketing efforts built on those things. Because once you have a positioning, once you know what you would like this product to be in the minds and the hearts of your customers, then you have to make sure that all of the elements that they see and they hear match that and reinforce that and foster that. And there's nothing that sticks out that doesn't quite make it right. And again, here we're talking now about which customers are we talking about? Back in the strategic question and answer, Are we targeting patients and physicians? Are we talking about both groups equally? Are there some things that are going to be more geared towards one group versus the other? Again, all of these things are part of your strategic questions that should have been answered already by the time you get to step 3 in this slide. Note that these are just sort of preliminary steps. I didn't give you the whole sort of model. I'm just sort of starting us off because as you're beginning the launch of any product, these are the things that you're thinking about fairly early on. But then your critical product commercialization efforts, some of the things that Kevin was talking about, those are going to come later on once some of these issues have already been settled. Okay, so let me move on. Okay, so just a quick slide so you can see that at each of these steps, there are a number of different market research exercises that you can conduct, a lot of different things that I'm not going to go into each of these in detail, but just so you know, there are there are market research study designs that are geared specifically towards these types of questions that you can do. You don't need to do all of them. Some of them are more appropriate depending on the kinds of audiences you're talking about, depending on budget and all those kinds of, practical things. But there is a market research approach tailored for these kinds of questions so that you can address them to your satisfaction. So you can come out of that step saying, I think we know the answer. We're confident, having spoken to our customers, that we know the answer to these questions, and we can successfully move on to the next step in the marketing plan. Okay, so and I'm going to toot my horn a little bit here. What psychologists do well in applying market research for the product commercialization efforts? First, and good moderators do this all. So for the first step, I'm not going to say it's just psychologists, but we ask questions well and we listen. Good moderating is about listening well, building rapport with respondents, getting recalcitrant respondents to give it up. Sometimes they're cranky. You got to talk a little bit. I'm a friendly guy, so talk to me. But successful moderation, successful conversation requires a conversational skill. You want them to talk about things they may not be as willing to talk about. Maybe they're reluctant. Maybe they feel like they're on the spot. Maybe they feel like they're being challenged. Why do you keep asking me about how I treat my patients? Do you think I'm doing something wrong? That kind of thing. It does happen. So you're not just following a script. It's a conversation. You want to put them at ease. You want to get information. Can you go back for a second? You can employ, and part of my training is employing unique non-rational techniques. Remember, there was the information sort of above the neck that you can ask questions, Q&A, like an interviewer would do, and then the stuff below the neck. How can I tease out some of those emotional, non-rational things? I can't just ask you how you feel. I can. I'm not going to be satisfied with the answer. But I use non-rational techniques. I can use different things to kind of get at how you feel without saying, how do you feel? So there's a number of different things that you can use, some non-rational projective techniques, thematic apperception tests, all these different things that psychologists are trained in and can do well. Things that patients or physicians may be unwilling or unable to tell you or not able to verbalize. There's fear of exposure, fear of awareness, social desirability, the pressure to look good. And you can avoid those things if you know how to ask these questions appropriately. They don't want to look foolish or uninformed, things like that. And then all of these different measures, all of these different ways of asking questions that perhaps are not typical of the kind of interview you may have been in the room or in the room in the glass behind, we can interpret those results. I can tell you what that means. I can help you with that analysis in the way that a non-psychologist might not. And again, I pride myself on these things. I enjoy it. I like being able to tease out those insights and turn them into actionable results. It's not just, these are fun questions to ask, and now I found out all this interesting stuff about my respondents. I can tell you what that means to you in the marketing of your product and what it means about how you should talk to these people, how you should approach them, the kinds of things they care about, and what it means for you to be able to move the dial on your product. Okay. Next one. Okay. So I don't know how much time we want to spend going into each of these different things, but when we talk about business strategy, we're talking about 3 different things: the what, the who, and the how. The what is your target profile. Even at the earliest stages, your target profile is, what can your product do? You have to know something about it. It may not be fully fleshed out yet, but even at the earliest stages of business strategy, you have to know what your product is likely to be able to do. Be objective, be realistic, look in the mirror and say, what can it really do for us? Who are the target customers? Again, is it patients? Is it providers? Is it payers, or whoever holds the purse strings? The folks who are going to be putting out the capital expense, if it's a device or a large product like that. And how are you going to approach the market? We talked about this already. So those are your key business strategy questions. Next slide. Your positioning. As I said, this is my bailiwick. I like this a lot. The cognitive emotional construct that lives in the mind of the customer relative to the competition. A good positioning tells you all these things. A good positioning has a lot to it. There's an awful lot going on in that real estate that you've carved out. And it's important to get this right. It's not something you say, it's something your customers believe and feel. Often, some of the best positionings I've ever seen are things that no one ever said, or you can't say. You're prohibited regulatorily from saying, but your customers believe it. If they do, you've won. Your positioning is not what your product is, it's what it does, it's what it means to your customer. And messages and ad campaigns do not sell products. Positionings do. I firmly believe that. Next slide. And then branding. Branding is kind of a combination of all these things. Your messaging, what you need to say, your creative executions. What's the imagery look like? What pictures do you want? How does it reinforce that positioning you're going for? How does it reinforce the ideas you're trying to get across? And then your communication, your plan, and your execution. How do you combine all these things together? What channels are you going to use? Are you going to go on social media? Are you going to go after customers? Are you going to have television ads? Are you going to have point of contact brochures in doctors' offices? Depends on what you're talking about. But all of that goes into your overall approach to branding your product. All of that is serviced by market research. All of that is serviced by the questions that you've answered up to that point. You should be able to figure that out if the research has been done successfully and effectively. Okay. And ultimately, all those little pieces, I should have labeled my little darts, but we're talking about all those different things. They're all working in harmony at different phases to get you to your target. And your target is to move the needle, to get your customers thinking about your product in a positive way, thinking about it, trying it, adopting it, and coming back to revisit it. Okay, I think I've covered all my slides. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
No, thank you, Michael. It's been a pleasure working with you on a number of launches, and I was very glad to be trained on some of the marketing models that you mentioned, and they are actually very effective in preparing organization for the launch. Another thing I wanted to mention to you as far as the role of market research when launching new products and supporting the launch of new product is absolutely essential. To have a strong partnership with the brand team. Without it, there is no way we can accomplish all of the projects and all of the tasks. And I think that, my relationship with many of you was that I really anticipated what your questions and try to have the answers, if not, to come up with those answers quickly, because as Kevin said, you cannot lose even a week when you are preparing for the launch, because it can be catastrophic. So building that relationship and understanding and collaboration is absolutely essential.